Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gerard Pratt. On behalf of the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Mr. Kerry Stokes, the Director, the Honourable Dr. Brendan Nelson, Council members and staff, welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. I would like to begin by acknowledging the many dignitaries and distinguished guests in attendance this morning. The donors to the Monash Memorial, Miss Margaret Jack, Mr. Ezekiel Solomon, the Brown family, including Mr. Wesley Brown, Mrs. Sari Brown, Mr. Gary Brown, Mrs. Robin Brown, and Mr. Roland Brown, and the estate of the late Nora and Robert Casebrook. The artists, Miss Sarah Holland-Batt and Mr. Charles Robb from the Queensland University of Technology. Representatives of the Diplomatic Corps from New Zealand, Great Britain, Germany, France, Israel, and the United States of America. Senator, the Honourable Scott Ryan, President of the Senate. The Honourable Dr. Mike Kelly, representing the Leader of the Federal Opposition. Minister Gordon Ramsay, Minister for Veterans and Seniors, ACT. Senator Linda Reynolds. Senator Darren Hinch. Lieutenant General Angus Campbell. Commodore Tim Brown, representing the Chief of Navy, and Air Commodore Mark Willis, representing the Chief of Air Force. To begin the proceedings, I would like to invite Ngunnawal Elder, Miss Tina Brown, to provide the welcome to country.
Good morning and welcome to the beautiful lands of the Ngunnawal. I'll begin by acknowledging my parents, Carl and Louise Brown, and all of the Ngunnawal elders and ancestors. I live my life in honour of you and the legacy you have passed to me. Many of you and some of you may know that Canberra is a local word meeting place, and we would say that the leaders of our nation and surrounding nations have been meeting on this land forever. Our oral stories and science tell us that we have been meeting on this land for more than 25,000 years. Our people have been able to maintain this continuous connection because the country provided fresh air to breathe, clean water to drink, nourishing food to eat, and clothing and shelter to keep us warm for our bitterly cold winters. It is on this once exacting land, as the extreme cold of the last ice age was easing, that my ancestors forged their resilience and grew their knowledge of country and handed to those of us who follow them the legacy of our ancestral beings and our creation stories and our responsibility for the future of our people and country. They formed pathways across this land to guide us. These pathways were formed as our ancestors followed the river and creek corridors and the spurs and hills and the mountains, linking our major spiritual and gathering places. The responsibility for future of our people and country now rests with all of us. So on behalf of the elders of my people, my extended family, and all who have gone before us, I welcome you to the ancestral lands of the Ngunnawal. I welcome my Indigenous sisters and brothers and am in awe of our legacy, tens and thousands of years in the making. I also welcome our fellow Australians and honour the mingling of the dust of the bones of my ancestors and the dust of the bones of your ancestors, for it is this which now shapes the land, uniting us all as custodians of the future. Welcome to the beautiful lands of the Ngunnawal. I'm not sure if that's on. It is. So we have a traditional smoking ceremony here as well. Do you want to hold this up? So what I'm going to do is put the leaves on here and create some smoke so that then we can clean the air and clean the spiritual grounds here and create a beautiful area for this beautiful monument here for thousands of generations to come and see. So come here.
Any guests who wish to step forward may do so.
Ngunnawal, Yan Yan, Biji, Balang.
I'd now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to deliver the welcome and reflections of Monash the man.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you very much, Tina. At the risk of offending sensibilities, if the smoke starts to get a bit too heavy onto the audience, we might move it away a little bit.
Sure.
So,
It's going to go down.
yeah, thank you. I would like to add to those who have been recognised Senator Claire Moore and also Michael Bennett, the great-grandson of General Sir John Monash. Charles Robb and Sarah Holland Batt are the artists who have produced this magnificent work in honour of our greatest general. And what Sarah Holland Batt and Charles, a poet and a sculptor working together, have done is to create an image of Monash as we requested circa 1924, after the war, but during one of the most significant decades in our nation's history, to depict John Monash in a civilian suit, with his RSL badge, his medals, holding a book, and as Sarah said, to depict him as a man in the midst of a world that was in great flux. Every hour, he said, of every day and every night, I am in the midst of tremendous events. Today, Les Carline AC was to have been here and to have spoken to us, and the dedication to be done, of course, by Lieutenant General Angus Campbell. Les Carline, unfortunately, is ill and obviously is not here. It gets worse. Instead of him speaking, I'm going to speak to you. We conceived the need to do this early in 2016. And as with many of the ideas, things we want to do and need to do, we had the idea but not the money. And so we committed $100,000 from the estate, as you probably gathered, of Nora and Robert Casebrook. I thought very carefully about it, and I asked 3 individuals if they would make a personal contribution to it, in addition to a significant contribution by the Australian people through our appropriation here at the Australian War Memorial. The first person I asked is a woman called Margaret Jack, whom I have known for almost 20 years. A proud Australian, a businesswoman who's committed much of her life to business, trade and cultural ties between Australia and China. She simply said, he's our greatest general, how much do you want? I then asked Zeke Solomon AM, senior partner of Alan Arthur Robinson, whom I first met when I was Minister for Education. And I noticed he was attending and contributing to a lot of discussion about the intellectual efforts in education. A man who has given much of his life to the Australia-US alliance, support for the state of Israel, and Australia's engagement in Asia. He too made a significant contribution. The third I asked was Gary Brown AM. I met Gary when I was asked to speak to the Sydney Rotary about 5 years ago. And his family, his father served in the Second World War, male and female members of his family have served, and he said to me, my parents impressed upon us John Monash's admonition that you should adopt as your fundamental creed to equip yourself for life, not just for your own sake, but for that of the entire community. And so here we are today. Albert Einstein was born 14 years after General Sir John Monash, and he outlived him by almost a quarter of a century. And unlike Monash, he lived through and was witness to an even greater cataclysm of the Second World War and the murder of 6 million Jews. And Einstein said, "The desire for knowledge for its own sake, a love of justice which borders on fanaticism, and a striving for personal independence. These," he said, "are the Jewish tradition that allow me to regard belonging to it as a gift of great fortune." He said, "History has imposed on us a difficult struggle. But if we remain devoted servants of truth, justice and liberty, we will not only persevere, but as we have done before, we will contribute through our productive labours works that enhance the ennoblement of humanity." And in those observations of the Jewish faith and of the Jewish people, the longest living peoples in the world, Einstein said much about what informed the character of the man whose statue is before you. Here at the Australian War Memorial, we reveal our character as a people, our soul. The paradox, as I say to young people, it's not actually about war. It's in a context of war. But this place is about love and friendship. Love for friends and between friends. Love of family. Love of our country. And honouring men and women whose lives are devoted not to themselves, but to us, and their last moments to one another. We reveal ourselves as a people, not only in those whom we choose to lead, but those whom we choose to honour. John Monash is only the third person, the third individual at this institution, this sacred ground, to be honoured with a sculpture. We have an ambulance stretcher bearer disobeying orders with a donkey, rescuing wounded men at Gallipoli. We have a soldier surgeon wearing humility more comfortably than a stethoscope, having tended to men suffering under the brutality of the Burma-Thai Railway in the Second World War. And here we now have Sir John Monash, a man who is a very small number of people. Some people lead from position, generals, chairman of a board, captain of a team. Some people eschew position and instead lead from principle. But occasionally, we get someone who leads from both. And John Monash was such a man. A soldier, an Anzac, an officer, a general, a consummate administrator, an engineer, a pianist, a painter, a man who committed and dabbled in carpentry, a Rotarian, a scout leader, a scholar, and then, at the end of the war, having commanded the Corps, in 8 months oversaw the demobilisation of 160,000 men in 8 months. By 1922, already for 2 years, the director of the State Electricity Commission in Victoria, he was president of Rotary in Melbourne and helped found Rotary in Australia. He chaired the construction committee for the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. He led the Anzac Day Parade from 1925. From 1927 he organised it. President of the Australian Association for the Advancement of Science. President of the Zionist Federation of Australia. And as Colin McInnes said, John Monash made anti-Semitism something that was unthinkable in Australia by the late 1920s. And then his qualities. A man whose intellect was never perhaps fully tested. Resourceful. A man who focused on detail. Who was fiercely independent, but consulted widely, and made those with whom he worked and those whom he led feel reverence for themselves. A man who was devoted to every cause to which he committed his life, and devoted to those with whom he served and whom he led. He was a consummate person in prosecuting his argument. Sir Robert Menzies said he was the most articulate man that he had ever listened to. He was also intensely patriotic. He was proud of his Jewish faith and ancestry, and part of the feature of his loyalty was that his personal staff were all Jewish, and the men respected him for that loyalty. But paradoxically, perhaps it might seem for a lay audience, he despised war. He despised its horror, the inefficiency which he described as ghastly, the impossible cruelty and the misery of war. Yet he, like this place, was reminded that in the end there are truths by which we live that are worth fighting to defend, politically, diplomatically, and at times militarily, when he saw it necessary to maintain national and social order. It's easy for us in our comfortable lives to forget that this country has never been more divided than it was in the 1920s. We emerged from that war victorious, inconsolably mourning 62,000 dead. We lived with another 60,000 who would die within 10 years of returning. We divided principally, but not only, around the conscription referenda, those who had enlisted and those who were regarded as shirkers. And Monash was a pillar and a pole in the tent of our brittle, fragile young democracy. And we remain true to our democratic principles. And then one of the indulgences you can have as a director is you can actually say what's going to go on a sculpture. So I said, I want another steel band around the base. Because during the Great Depression, a right-wing movement, many fascists, exhorted John Monash to lead an insurrection against the government. And in repudiating them, he said in part, the only hope for Australia is in the ballot box and an educated electorate. And therein, for generations that will see, reflect upon and absorb the qualities of this man, in this sculpture, are three things. First is for us to never take for granted the democratic principles and values upon which our nation has been built, which are our primary interests: political, economic and religious freedoms. Second, the importance of egalitarianism, that we are people that do not place position above principle. We revere the idealism and the heroism of the everyday Australian. This man in the 1920s was widely regarded as the most respected Australian, and the veterans in particular saw him as unpretentious, not part of the establishment, honest, intelligent and decent. And finally, Monash knew that what will protect our nation most from ideas, attitudes and policies deeply rooted in ignorance and forged on an anvil of prejudice is education. And he, like all of us, will be remembered not for what he was, but who he was. the character of the man.
The band of the Royal Military College Duntroon will now perform the music piece, The Great Little Army March. This work was composed in 1916 by First World War British bandmaster Kenneth J. Alford. The Great Little Army March commemorated the resolve of the Allied soldiers during the First World War. I'd now like to invite General Campbell to deliver the commemorative address.
Chairman of the Australian War Memorial Council, Mr. Kerry Stokes, Director of the War Memorial, Dr. Brendan Nelson, parliamentarians, members of the Diplomatic Corps, attachés, family of Sir John. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is a great honour and absolute pleasure to be here this morning with you to be part of this dedication ceremony. I too wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people and the traditional custodian responsibilities that they have held and cared for this land where we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders both past and present. This is a distinguished and magnificent statue of General Sir John Monash, and in commemorating his achievements and his impact on Australian society, we commemorate an entire generation, many of whom he led and who looked up to him always as a leader. The sculpture is a striking work of art created by Miss Sarah Holland-Batt and Mr. Charles Robb of the University of Technology in Queensland, and I commend them and wish them well in their artistic careers if this is an example of their work. I also offer my thanks and appreciation to the donors who have come together to allow this to occur, and appreciate Dr. Nelson's introductory remarks with that regard. The generosity of our donors makes so much occur here at the War Memorial and more broadly in commemorating our heritage and history. I thank you all. It is appropriate that we're meeting today and dedicating this statue today on the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Hamel in France, the 4th of July, 1918. Hamel is an outstanding example of Monash's military acumen, planning ability and leadership. A recent history of the first Australian Imperial Force as a fighting force makes this assessment. There was much in the planning and execution of the attack that was innovative and adaptive, but it was the bringing together of a number of widely sourced ideas and the management of the planning process that has given Hamel and its chief planner, Monash, such a positive reputation. Hamel is rightly regarded as one of many high points of Monash's distinguished service commanding the Australian Corps on the Western Front in 1918. It was an achievement Sir John remained proud of, stating in 1926, "No battle within my previous experience, not even Messines, passed off so smoothly, so exactly to timetable, or was free from any kind of hitch." The Battle of Hamel is emblematic of the start of Monash and the Australian Corps' most significant period of contribution to victory on the Western Front. Hamel and the AIF's fighting effort through the rest of that decisive northern summer, show us how far the AIF had developed since 1914. Hamel employed a combined arms approach, bringing together artillery and infantry, tanks, aircraft, all of the cutting-edge technologies of the day and the cutting-edge doctrines of the day to capture what was a limited objective, but against an experienced and lethal enemy. Under Monash's leadership, the Australian Corps proved it was the equal of any other formation in the British Expeditionary Force, successfully fighting a sophisticated enemy in the main theatre of the war. Sir John's standing as one of Australia's greatest military leaders merits his statue's position here at the Australian War Memorial, the heart of our nation's commemoration of military service and sacrifice in service. The soul of our Anzac heritage lies here. But I'm also delighted that he is depicted in civilian pose, because our army fights for and represents our Australian civil society and its values. Furthermore, support to our ex-service men and women in their later civilian lives most appropriately recognises and honours the sacrifice of those who didn't return and the suffering of some of those who did. This is something the General remained passionate about throughout his life. As important a military figure as Monash was, we miss much if we only focus on Monash the General. This is why this sculpture acknowledges the depth and complexity of the contribution of the man and his service to the nation. Yes, General Sir John Monash was a full-time soldier for 5 years and a committed and enthusiastic citizen soldier for most of his adult life. The medals and awards depicted on his left breast are recognition of this. However, he made an unprecedented contribution across many other aspects of Australian life. As we've heard, engineer, business owner, public servant, director or board member of many enterprises. Sir John's working interests across an active career are many and varied. Equally noteworthy was the inspiration and devotion he brought to social issues and charitable causes, not only, but particularly with regard to returned servicemen and their families. All of which he carried out with his characteristic energy, intellect and commitment. I note the sculpture's depiction of a book in Sir John's left hand. This is a most authentic detail, conveying something central to the man and to our understanding of him. Sir John was a true polymath, deeply versed in subjects as diverse as military art and science, the law, engineering, music, English literature, journalism and philosophy. All were studied intently and all were mastered. Underpinning this was a lifelong zeal for self-development and education to enable service, not for self, but for self and others. That famous quote we've heard already, which I will reprise, from the General sums up this aspect of his life and is a worthy approach to any life. Adopt as your fundamental creed that you will equip yourself for life, not solely for your own benefit, but for the benefit of the whole community. At the base of the sculpture is another quote from Sir John, recorded in perpetuity and for all to read and reflect upon. As we've heard in the later part of 1930, he was approached by members of the New Guard, inviting the General to lead an action against the democratic government of Australia. Monash's wisdom and enduring commitment to the founding values of the nation and the liberal democratic freedoms of his fellow citizens shines through in his response. The only hope for Australia is the ballot box and an educated electorate. It was true then, it is true 100 years later. It will always be true. Perhaps the greatest legacy, and in my mind it is the greatest legacy, of our greatest general is this lesson in humility, restraint and faith in his fellow Australians. General Sir John Monash, a remarkable Australian, a man of great intellect, character, drive and ability. Australia is better for having had him as a citizen, a soldier and a leader. This sculpture we dedicate here today in this sacred place is a most fitting public acknowledgement 100 years since that striking battle of our gratitude for his dedicated service to our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, General. General Campbell will now unveil the plaque with Mr. Kerry Stokes, Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial. Thank you, General Campbell and Mr. Stokes. I now invite Rabbi Ganendi, Senior Rabbi of the Australian Defence Force, to formally dedicate the General Sir John Monash sculpture.
Thank you. I'm going to do this in two parts. The first part is prayer for Australia. The second part is a memorial dedication prayer in memory and honour of Sir John Monash. Bless, O God, our country of Australia and all its inhabitants. Let us have dreams in this land of long dreams. Let the hot winds from the desert fire our imagination. Let the red soils of the plains keep us rooted to the things that really matter. Let the deep waters of our oceans and lakes flow into our hearts, giving us depth and understanding. May we remember the original inhabitants of this land and their lingering song lines. May we stand as tall and strong, as mighty as our mountains, and be as gentle as our places of quiet beauty. May your spirit vitalize this great land, enter the hearts of our government and leaders, protect the members of the Australian Defence Force, whether at home or overseas. Implant in our hearts a spirit of love and unity, that we may work and live together in harmony and fellowship for the well-being of this society that we are building together, and that was part of the vision of Sir John Monash. I'm going to do the memorial prayer partly in Hebrew and then in English. El malei rachamim shochen bamromim המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזרקיה מזהירים את נשמת יעקב בן יהודה שהלך לעולמו בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, לכהן מלא רחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני נחלתו, וינוח על משכבו בשלום, ונאמר אמן. God full of compassion, today we pray for the memory of Sir John Monash as we dedicate this memorial in his memory. Yaakov ben Yehuda, Jacob, son of Judah, his Hebrew name, strategist of skill and innovation, militarist of courage and distinction, a diplomat of vision, fighter for freedom, proud Australian and loyal Jew. May his memory continue to inspire us to dream and to achieve, to work for the common good and to be committed citizens. May the Lord be his heritage. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Ganende. Ladies and gentlemen, if you feel comfortable and can do so, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.